Jin is often cited as the perfect champion in terms of interesting gameplay and theme being aligned. Which other champs do you feel fit the perfect design, but not that maybe as widely recognized? So this is the idea of interesting gameplay and theme being aligned. So I want to note some things about that comment. So, and then I can answer you. So the question was hey, Jin is recognized as perfect because of gameplay and theme being aligned. I want to note that there's a lot of things that go into probably why people think Jin is cool. As an example, he doesn't tend to frustrate you. And so even if, so a lot of people are more likely to say Jin is great than say Yasuo is great. Because there's a lot of people who get frustrated by Yasuo. But I would argue Yasuo is incredible, actually one of our more perfect designs. So I just want to note that there's a lot of things that go into a community perception of a character being perfect, but or a good design or things like that. And I'm overall very, very happy with Jin, of course. But I think he gets to cheat a little bit in terms of being, because he's a long-range AD carry, and he doesn't necessarily go for walls, and he doesn't have to fight you in melee range. And honestly, the art team on Jin just knocked that out of the park across the board. He has such amazing sounds and voices and all this incredible stuff that was going on with him beyond just the fact that he works in a certain way with the game design. But if we're talking about hey, what are champions where the gameplay and theme are very, 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 very well aligned and really make you feel like that character, feel like you're in their head, things like that. Some of the characters I would throw out would be Yasuo. I genuinely believe that Yasuo is one of my favorite characters of all time in any MOBA. I'd put him up there with Pudge. Pudge being the original Blitzcrank. Pudge being the hook guy in Dota. I think Pudge is one of the best characters of all time in a MOBA, and I think Yasuo's up there with him. To me, Yasuo just he's a samurai, a wind samurai, and he feels like you're playing this wind samurai, and he's really he's just great. I love Yasuo. Another character I would put out here is Rengar. I'm not gonna say Rengar is perfect from a frustration or fair to play against standpoint, but again, the conversation is, I think the question was a lot around gameplay and theme being aligned. And I think Rengar is a predator, pride hunter, guy who's trying to hunt people down and destroy them, right? He really feels like that, especially his ultimate. You go into Rengar ult, things get a little quieter, you start hearing the heartbeats, and and then you go run down that AD carry and stab them to death, right? I think Rengar, from a theme crossed with gameplay standpoint, is actually fairly incredible. I think Caitlyn is overall a really, really good design. I think she's pretty awesome. She's got a very basic, straightforward sniper kit. It's I'm the long range auto attack AD carry, and I think she's got a lot of things. Over the years, she's done that pretty well. She tends to be a favorite for people who just want to play kind of straightforward AD carry. I think Kai'Sa's gameplay is immaculate in the long term. I used to be more frustrated with Kai'Sa, but I think in the long term I'd say Kai'Sa is actually a really incredible gameplay character. I don't know if her theme really aligns all that well. I don't know if she's perfect theme, but if we're talking about one of our top tier gameplay characters, I think Kai'Sa is really, really up there. I think she's pretty awesome. Draven is an incredible intersection of gameplay and theme. It results in very toxic players. But if we're talking just about a character that really hits theme and gameplay and puts them together, Draven does that so well. So well. He just he really puts you in the mindset of I am 1v9ing this game and I am better than everybody, and the whole catching axes, the whole dominating people in lane, the passive, the whole theme about Draven being about Draven and thinking he's the best. It's it all goes together to I think Draven kind of in a lot of ways is iconic for being an on theme character for not just in game but also the people who play him. Anybody else? I think Fiddlesticks has a lot of cool stuff going on, kind of the uniqueness of his gameplay combined with being the embodiment of fear. It's just the character really does create this unknown around him of you need to know where the creepy scarecrow is. And if this creepy scarecrow is unknown, like if he's hiding in a dark corner, then he'll show up and murder you, right? Like he's this horror monster, and I think a lot of that translates into playing against him in the game as well. I think that he's a fairly cool execution of theme and gameplay. Yeah, those are some examples, I would say. Years ago when you had the League forum, did you use any of the old champion community posts for creating new champs? Or for inspiration to create new champs? Well, again, we were kind of like, there was a champ suggestion forum back then, and designers were advised to avoid it because it had very real possible like bad legal ramifications of like if we made a champ that had been posted on the forums, as an example. And so even though we had champion suggestion forums, we generally tended to avoid it. And part of this, again, is because ideas, as I mentioned earlier, ideas are cheap. And so while I guarantee you in those suggestion forums there were some really good ideas, it turns out you can also think of really good ideas internally and things like that. Had a lot of people coming up with interesting ideas potentially without necessarily going to the champion suggestion forum. One thing I did do at one time though, is I once went on that champion suggestion forum to gain inspiration for special moves that Vi could have. And so when I was working on Vi, which I started at Riot, I was interested in like, hey, I'm making a pugilist, that's the word, pugilist. I'm making a fighter, you know, she punches you. And I was like, well, what would a fighter do when they're punching you? Like, what are the potential moves that they could do? And so I did at one point go on those forums and kind of like just surf through to like see like what was the kind of like expectation space when people were pitching fighters there. Like it's like, were there any like certain types of things that many people would pitch when they saw a fighter? So as a dumb example of this, if like whenever people pitch a sniper, that sniper usually has a long range sniping skill, right? Like it's like they go hand in hand, right? And so as a fresh designer, I was like, what do people typically think of when they think of a fighter who's punching you? One of the things I saw a lot on those forums was the Dempsey Roll. It's like this move that they've done in boxing or something that like is also shown up in some animes and stuff. But yeah, use that for some inspirations. The end result on Vi didn't really have anything that I took from the forums, but I did use it to just get a taste of like, what do people think about when they think about fighters who fight by punching? Where does the 200 years meme originate from? Oh man, so this is an interesting story. Basically what happened is there was a designer working on the team who really liked taking community feedback. He's a really great guy, really cool dude, and he, would often, take community feedback, and he was very active with the community. And he was working on a Wukong update. And the Wukong update, there was a Wukong main who was very adamant that the Wukong update was super giga insanely weak. An important note to say here is that it was not super giga insanely weak. It was actually super giga insanely strong. And so this designer was like internet with the community, and this Wukong main gave him feedback of like, hey, he's weak. And the designer like kind of responded with like, we're fairly certain he's not weak, and we have like over 200 plus years of combined game dev experience behind that, right? It's kind of and the idea behind that comment is like, hey, there's a lot of really experienced people working on this project, and so we're fairly confident that this thing is like that. And it perhaps wasn't worded in the best way, because a lot of folks, if you hear that, like, oh, 200 years of experience, you're like, well, if you've got 200 years of experience, why is there this crazy thing in the game? And so then the community took that and they ran with it with like, things like Zoe one-shotting you and Aphelios being really, really, really crazy on release and things like that. And so it kind of became like a very just a clear joke of like, oh, hey, when Riot has all this experience, like, here's some crazy stuff they've done with all that experience, right? And so, yeah, and like colloquially, like Aphelios, because if you don't know, Aphelios came out very strong on release. A lot of players then were like, he's the 200 years guy, because look at all these 200 years of things he's doing and stuff like that. I think it was a little unfortunate because the designer who was talking to the community on this stuff, he like genuinely was like a really great dude who like, just wanted to have good conversations with people. And I think his wording on that specific comment, wasn't that great, which, got a lot of people like, that's why it got memed, like rightfully got memed probably. And this is something I'm very, very familiar with, and also often actually have like a lot of worry and panic about, is it's really easy as a dev to like say something that's not necessarily perfect, even if you have the right intentions, right? And so I'm always worried about saying, dumb stuff that legitimately can make players like feel bad or feel like I'm being silly or things like that, right? And so that's always something you got to be really careful about as a dev when you're, working on the game, is, sometimes things don't come out the ideal way.